Ladyada 2022 edition.
I know, our first Ladyada in 2022.
It's been a long year.
we're now 40 years behind. We have 40-year-old tech behind the desk and in front of the desk.
We'll be talking about that a lot more. You know, folks are wondering why we switched over to the retro graphics last year. Well, now you know. We have a bunch of retro projects and more. So this week, Ladyada...
Can you take these glasses?
Yeah, you should take those glasses off immediately. So what do you want? Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you need rose-colored glasses to see this world. So there's a bunch of stuff going on. We've been posting up a storm, as they say. We took off on Wednesday, but instead of taking off, we just did a ton of work that I think people will like. So what do you want to talk about this week?
Okay, well, we got a lot going on. Do you want me to start? Do you want to play the videos for the?
Well, let's do the intro. So, what have you been working on? And then we'll play the 9-minute. So we have a 9-minute video with all of the things we've been doing. All the updates, and it's great because it's little 1-minute bite-sized pieces, and there's 9 segments, 9 minutes. Actually, a little less than that. But what have you been working on?
Okay, so we've got all these floppy disks that you and I, Phil, have collected over the years, and ever since we did the Print Floppy project, where we extracted the data from that Prince floppy disk that Neil Dash had after bumping into Neil Dash at a park in New York City. I was actually looking into why was it so hard for us to get the data off, and it's because it's like a Mac double-sided.
Everyone assumes their PC disks don't work anymore.
No, it's interesting.
Not true.
I didn't know this. So Mac single-sided, double-sided, and high-density disks are actually completely formatted in different ways with different spindle speeds. So it's like there's no way you can basically read the diskette data off of anything but up like an old PowerBook, which you happen to have. But I wanted to get a flux image of this disk, and so I started going down this path of what would it take to image floppy disks. Also, I have some bunch of old floppy disks that I wanted to image and recapture. And I started looking at people you have to connect to the floppy disk and read the data off the disk, and it's hard and weird. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna look into it. So it turns out floppy disks, they do have a kind of an interesting weird way of transmitting data, but ever since people started interfacing with them, the microcontrollers have gotten better and better, and you can actually use a microcontroller and bit bang the data in and read a full track at a time. And I thought it would be kind of cool if we could add this capability to CircuitPython, so you could mount a fat formatted floppy disk in CircuitPython. So this is kind of a multi-pronged project where I'm doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah, the other thing is there's a chip shortage, so everyone who wanted to do all sorts of projects can't, and there's also a lot of old tech around. Instead of throwing it into the dumpster, you could use it. So we want to do a little bit of that. So okay, well, let's play the film, and then we'll pop back on the other side.
Yeah, so this is what the 1 week process of me learning a lot about how to interface with floppies and what it looks like when you interface with floppy disk drives.
Here we go. Okay, Ladyada, what's this?
Okay, those are index pulses coming from this floppy drive that I am interfacing with. I just got, the first kind of parts going where I enable the motor and I'm setting the direction. I'm going to, get the index pulses, and then I'm going to find out when it's at track 0. So basically trying to read data off of this floppy drive so I can add native floppy disk support to CircuitPython. Soon I'll update this to maybe use the RP2040 as well. Right now I'm just writing the code in Arduino because that's what I'm familiar with. So I finally got all the IDC pins set up the way I needed to. What was really helpful was this really, really nice modern data sheet from Samsung for the SFD 321B. So it actually goes through everything you need. And so far so good. So I've just started basically getting the motor running. The floppy disk is responding. So far, so good. Hi!
I want to copy that floppy.
That's right. Here I've got some more stuff going on with my floppy disk controller that we're going to add to CircuitPython. So yellow traces you can see is the index pulse. It goes low, and then you see this moving blue line. That's actually data coming out of the floppy drive. If I click the single button, you can see the data comes out, and it comes out as these pulses that are they're supposed to kind of be like a PWM, but they're actually just very low pulses, and then there's a pull up to pull it up high. And you can see that the data comes in, in various widths. And so that's actually the tough part of reading a floppy, is this is about 500 kilohertz. And the pulse width varies encoding the data. So over here, I'm actually doing something a little naughty. I'm not using a PLL. I'm actually just very, very quickly, in a no interrupt loop, reading those pulses and printing out the pulse widths. And I'm going to see if that's good enough to read data from a floppy drive.
Okay. Nice Nordic shirt. Ladyada, what are we doing?
Okay, so part 3 of my floppy project is I've got the data coming out of the read pin. And this is a GPIO pin I'm toggling up and down to show that I'm properly reading the pulse widths for the data that's coming out in MFM format. And then what I've done over here is you can see I'm capturing flux transition, and I've got a Cortex M4 here with like 256K of RAM. And so it's actually totally fine for me to just buffer the entire track of flux transitions because there's only 100,000 transitions maximum per track. And you can see that there's a little bit of binning here. So there's a couple pulses, a lot of pulses around 40. And then down here, we've got pulses around 60. And then finally, we've got pulses around 80. We've got a couple extra long ones, which is a little bit weird. Like, why is it 228? So a little bit more to analyze here. But I'm starting to get data coming in, and the data looks right.
Ladyada, what is this?
Okay, so we're doing some floppy drive hacking, and I've got this like original 3.5-inch floppy drive, but these are actually hard to get because they're not made anymore. So I was wondering, there's these off-the-shelf USB floppy disks, and can I somehow use those? So I opened one up, I cracked it open, and it actually has a SFD 321S Samsung 3.5-inch floppy drive with a little adapter here, and the adapter's got a little cheap chip on the back, and there's all these points here, and I'm hoping, can I get flux transitions out of here, because I don't want it to do the translation for me. I want to get that raw data. Well, good news, I found a really nice person online who actually did the pinouts, and then when I access the disk, you can see on the scope, I get my index and flux transitions. So, normally if you use these USB to floppy drive converters, you don't, they give you like a USB mass storage, but this way I can get that archival quality flux transition data out.
Ladyada, what is this?
Okay, I still got my Panasonic floppy disk drive and my Feather that I'm interfacing with. And I've gotten flux data out, and now I want to get that flux data from the disk drive and the Feather into the computer. So I'm using this open source tool called greaseweazle, and I'm updating it to support this setup that I've got here. So basically I'm reporting the greaseweazle firmware into Arduino. So far so good. There's some like flux opcode thing that I got to figure out. Like I've got the flux data leaving here. You can see it's got the flux data sent, and then over here it says, okay, got the flux data, but then I have to like somehow encode the index. So I'm getting there. I'm close to getting raw data dumps onto my computer using totally open source hardware and software.
Okay, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Boo.
Hey, what is this?
This is the first floppy disk I'm going to try reading with my greaseweazle compatible firmware on this Feather M4 hooked up to this floppy disk. So I've got flux data and track seeking working, and I'm able to get some tracks working, like some tracks are reading just fine. I'm also getting some tracks where it's like it doesn't see any sector data, and I think that's probably because like the flux data format I'm sending or the index whatever opcode I'm sending isn't quite right. But for those first few sectors that I do get working, the data is good. So I'm just gonna have to figure out what it is that I'm doing that's slightly wrong, but I feel like I'm getting closer. At least I'm seeking, and I'm getting some data working from the beginning of the disk track.
What is this?
Okay, I think I figured out all my power supply issues and my flux timing issues, and I'm ready to read the secret disk that I got that they hid in that place that one time.
Right.
Thank you, Acid Burn. So I'm gonna put this in my floppy drive, and then over here on greaseweazle, I'm going to start capturing track data. So I'm going to capture all the MFM IBM PC sector tracks, all 80 times 2 heads, so 160 total tracks. Okay, So we have read all of the sectors 100%. So it's ready to open up Win Image. We're going to open up that secret image. Oh my God, this is going to open, but I'm going to open it anyways. Yeah, let's just open it. Oh no! Not again. Yeah. I just got Rickrolled by my own floppy disk reader.
Dude, what is this?
Okay, so we've still got our floppy setup going on here where we're capturing flux traces from a 3.5-inch floppy drive. But I've replaced the Feather M4 7051 with this pink feather, not just because pink is a cool color, but because this feather has an RP2040 on it, which is a low-cost chip from the Raspberry Pi Foundation. And this chip can run really fast. It also has this cool PIO peripheral. So we're overclocking it to 200 megahertz, because why not? We're getting good flux captures over here. And when we recompiled it and we're running a greaseweazle, it's just working. So this is cool because now I've got 2 different platforms that work with this Arduino library, which is the goal, to make it hardware agnostic so more people can wire up hardware and build hardware to work with floppy disk drives. And then next up, maybe we'll try this little fellow, the Raspberry Pi Pico $4 microcontroller board.
What is this?
Okay, I'm wrapping up for the night. It's getting a little late. Time to maybe do some yoga and chill out. So I've got the final board I'm going to interface with. This is the Raspberry Pi Pico. So this is a $4 microcontroller. And the reason I'm targeting this is it's available, like DigiKey has 17,000 of them in stock, and some of the hardware that people are using for open source floppy interfacing isn't available because we're in a silicon shortage, but this chip is available. So it's nice is that the pinouts like kind of line up very nicely. You can connect them straight through to your floppy disk drive, and then load the Arduino code onto it, and I set up the pinouts all nicely, and tested it, read a whole floppy just fine, and then I've submitted this to the Arduino library registry, so you'll be able to get releases, and maybe I'll even have it auto-generate UF2 files. So I think I'm done for tonight. Maybe time to celebrate.
Good work.
Glass of water.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're back. So that's an overview of everything that we're doing. Couple little side notes. I changed the ending for each little chapter because we're all on all the social media channels. And what you didn't see is this. And this is a little bit of computing history from me. So I started Hackaday. I thought because Hackaday did a lot of retro stuff, that was my vision, my idea, that it would have a floppy disk. And I'm like, well, maybe that's not going to work out. So I've been thinking about this like floppy rabbit forever. I raised Holland Lops when I was in 4-H. And so I was just like, well, so Bruce and I, Bruce our designer, we were like, okay, let's jam out and figure out a way. So if even though it's not real, the little eyes are the the hubs that spin. And it's a floppy disk. If you look close, you see the ears. I like logos that when you look at it, does a couple different things, like the FedEx logo, back in the day, the Northwest logo. So anyhow, that's a little bit of background. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're up to. Do you want to talk about the hardware that you're doing and then the Great Search?
Yeah.
Okay.
As you said, I'm I wrote this library, Adafruit Floppy, and it's kind of designed to be a generic floppy interfacing library so that you don't have to have specialized hardware. Because right now, a lot of the floppy.
Pull it up on GitHub.
Yeah.
Right there, and I'll pop to the computer real quick.
Okay, so it's here.
Okay. So
it's called Adafruit Floppy, and it kind of generalizes a lot of the interfacing stuff and the things that you normally want to do. And like, it's so confusing because like polarity is inverted and floppies are open drain. So right now, it supports talking to 34-pin drives, like sometimes called Shugart drives. That should work. Right now, I know it works with 3.5-inch floppies. It should work totally the same with 5.25, and it might even work with some 8-inch drives. Apple II drives and Atari drives and Commodore 64 drives, I think, are a different interface. And so we're going to try to add those as well. But I'm starting with like 3.5 because it's kind of like the most common. And then I want to add like Apple II and Commodore 64. So
we want to play Top Gun. So look at this. We got Top Gun. And then, we've got Print Shop.
Print Shop.
Because everyone has a copy of Print Shop. It's the law.
It is. I mean, everyone used Print Shop as a kid. I did too. I made those calendars.
Yeah.
It was like super fun actually. Like it was kind of neat at the time. You're like, you could come up with something and print it on paper. And on your image writer too. So that's where it's at. I mean, I've only been working on it for a week. The thing that I got working recently is I emulate the greaseweazle interface, and greaseweazle is software that's written in Python that you run on the command line that connects to the hardware and grabs the data and then saves it into like disk formats for you. So, floppy disks, you need to read data very fast. Like you really need like 20 megahertz sample rate reading data, and usually that means like 100 plus megahertz processor, because usually it's like you have to sample and count and comparing, so you need like 5 instructions per read, and so that's how you end up with needing 100 plus megahertz processors. That's where the Cortex M4 7051 and the RP2040 are great. They're low cost and they're super fast. And then you read the full track's worth of data at a time, and then you can transfer it over USB to like the computer, which can store massive flux images or do the decoding. It also, what's neat about greaseweazle is it's like, it'll look for the formatted data. It'll be like, okay, I found the sector data in the correct format on the magnetic flux. And if it doesn't, you'll reread it a couple times. So it's all that stuff should be done on the computer. It doesn't. You can do it on microcontroller, and I'm going to try to do some of it. But when you want to support massive numbers of different formats, computer software is where it's at. So it's got greaseweazle, and there's also a software called Flux Engine. And again, both require kind of specialized hardware, which you should purchase to support them. But I wanted to also have a way that people could in the future use other chips. And possibly there might be other things you want to do with floppy disks, like turn them into musical instruments, or again, add floppy disk data support to Arduino or CircuitPython, so you can actually read the files off the disk. So that's where the project's at.
The other thing is all of the floppies out there are disintegrating, and a lot of people assume they pop it in somehow with a USB drive that's supposed to work, but all these formats are different. It doesn't, so they just throw stuff away. And there's millions and millions of disks, and our entire computing history is getting lost by the hour. So we get hate mail, hate tweets, because people are like, why are you wasting your time with this? Digital preservation is a big deal. Check out archive.org and more. And there's a lot of things that we could all learn. And also, there is a ton of computing history. And if you don't know computing history, you will doom to repeat it. We really need to make things better, because trust me, it's not exactly working out right now.
Yeah. That's all we could learn.
Yeah. So that being said,
okay. So
what else do you want to do?
Let's go into the Great Search, and I'll show off the PCBs, and then we'll show off the connectors I need to get.
Where in the world is that part I need? The Great Search with DigiKey.
The Great Search brought to you by DigiKey and Adafruit. Every single week, Ladyada uses her powers of engineering for good to show you how to find things on digikey.com. Ladyada, what is the Great Search of the week this week?
Okay, so this week I've been working on floppy disk interfacing. So I designed some hardware. First up is a feather that'll connect to 34-pin IDC cables that are on the back of floppy disk drives.
What do you want to do?
The feather.
This one?
Nope.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's just kind of, to make it easier for me to do the wiring, because there's so many pins that you need to connect. It's not 34 pins, because every other pin is ground, but it is like 12 or 13 pins or 14 pins. So it can get a little hairy. And then to do a little bit more advanced interfacing, where you might want to talk to different drives, I have a little like flippy floppy friend that will have all the different connector formats.
Flippy floppy.
Yeah. Thank you for the little watermark.
Yeah.
It's
not a watermark. I just like the logo.
That's
I gotta remember, because I don't want.
No, I don't mean watermark. Like, don't use the image.
I don't want anyone to say, now you're watermarking images. We're not. I like the little graphic we made.
Thank you for having a little friend. And actually these are up on GitHub under an upper permissive license, so you can use them right now. So this is just looking at a breadboard to 34-pin IDC connector. The IDC cable is quite easy. We've actually covered IDC cables on the Great Search. So this is a standard 34-pin cable. If you have to do the twisted part, you need to get the special cable. But for just like you want to connect to one drive, just use a straight through IDC. But the tough part that's a little bit more annoying is the power connector. So let's go to the overhead. I can show this power connector. So let's see. Go here. So this is the IDC connector, and I'm just using jumper cables right now, but it's a 2x17 IDC. And then there's this power connector, and the power connector is, it looks like it's a 2.54 inch. Okay. It looks like it's a 2.54 inch, but it's got like a keyed connector. And one thing that's a little scary is, one side's 5 volts and the other side's 12 volts. Now, floppy drives don't actually use 12 volts, but just in case, it's probably best not to flip the cable around, especially if you're connecting, maybe to drives that do require 12 volts. Like I imagine 5.25 inch disc drives require 12 volts because they're just that much bigger. But I don't know, maybe 8-inch drives. But the connector is spec'd for 12 volts. And so I want to make sure that even though today I'm using just like a jumper cable, I want to get those keyed connectors so that on my PCB, when people connect, there's no risk of mixing it up. So let's go to the computer. And, okay. So I actually just typed in to Google floppy disk power connector because I was like, what is this connector? And there's nothing wrong with your Googling. You never know. You might be able to get some good info. So this is a nice image on Wikipedia. And you can see the keyed connector. Red, I think, is 5 volts, and then black, 2 grounds, and then yellow. Maybe it's the other way around. And then this is the power connector here, and this is the data connector there. And again, the data connector is IDC standard issue. So this cable is actually called a Berg Connector, which I always find really funny because Berg is a sub-brand of Molex. It was purchased by, Amphenol. So even though it's a full company, people like to say it's a Berg Connector, and this is true of JSTs as well. People are like, it's a JST or it's a Molex. And it's okay, these are companies that manufacture hundreds of different connectors. So that's a weird way of calling it. It's what is that car model? Oh, it's a Ford. A Ford what? Oh, just a Ford. There's many Ford cars. Anyways, so this connector is, let's see, I even have the pin out, which is nice. Oh, yellow is 12 volts. So what's nice is it's a 2.5 millimeter pitch, and it is keyed, so you definitely want to get the right one. What's nice is they say here the part number, which is amp 1718264. So go to DigiKey and we type that in. And sometimes you don't get the connector, but in this case, they actually do have them in stock, which is quite nice. Even though floppy disk drives are no longer made, this connector is still available, which is nice and fancy. Oh wait, let me you can look at the 3D model here as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this connector because I'll be able to get cables that have the matching polarity on both sides, custom made. I will say it's not a standard cable, so it's if you're looking for that on DigiKey, you're not going to find it. However, I thought as a bonus I'd show how to get a cable that might not be keyed, but you might be able to use, even though it's not using the same exact part number. It's a bit of a hack, but you'll find that, especially in larger pitch cables, if it's 2.5 millimeter, you can find almost any 2.5 millimeter and kind of get it to work, and that might hold you over until you get proper cables made. So let's go to cable assemblies. And in this case, it's even though it's a single line, it would be called a rectangular cable assembly. Keep this running. And one thing that I do like is the DigiKey search has updated recently, so when you click on stuff, it does the sub selection highlighting. So, for example, if you go to the connector, and we know this is a 2.5 millimeter, 0.098 inch, it'll actually you can see like it grays out the cable versions, like the cable PID products that won't be available. So like there is no 60 pin 2.5 millimeter, which is expected. But there is 4 single row. And when I apply this, I like to apply because it kind of clears up some stuff. And then let's look at what's in stock. And there's a few cables, and some of them I'm like, I don't know, this is kind of a little bit of a strange connector. But this one, might work. It's short, so maybe we could look for a longer one. Let's see, length. Let's get one that's like 6 to, half a foot to a foot long. Yeah, some of these are, like this one. It's a Molex, but I think it might work. I think like this one is a little bit weird, this Bizou style. It's like a waterproof connector. Or this JST XAF, I think could also work. Like it looks like it would fit. I'm going to order some of these and try it out. But, before you get cables custom made or you crimp cables, it's worth it to get like one of each of like, the matching pitch and like look type cables. And even though you wouldn't use it in like a final production, again, it could get your prototyping up and running, because like the cable that I want isn't made normally, and I'm gonna have to contact a PCB cable making house and tell them, hey, I want the floppy connector on both ends. That's not a standard connector. Usually it would go from like the motherboard power supply to the floppy disk. So this is the bonus round. The connector is the TE amp right angle, but this is a cable that I think might work as well.
Okay, and is that the great search?
That's the great search.
And that's a great search.
A twofer.
Where in the world is that part I need? The great search with DigiKey.
All right, so I thought we would do a special segment that will probably be a blog post series, because you know what most people like? My blog posts. So there's like one guy that doesn't. So this is, I'm calling it Tales from the Hack. And Ladyada and I...
Tales from Hack in the Day?
Yeah, sort of. Ladyada and I have a rich history in the world of the hacker world, but these are positive good stories, because there ain't a lot of them. At least the ones you don't really hear anymore. And so those are some Apple floppy drives in the back there. Could you think of a story of maybe when...
Think of a story.
Could you remember a time where maybe people were making fun of you for doing retro hardware and what the outcome was?
The outcome was I looked cool in the end.
No, it just took a while to get to that. Sometimes people are really mean in person. Sometimes they're even meaner online. But tell me about the story that you told me that I thought was so good that we actually emailed to people, because I'm just like, this is the best story I've ever heard.
Well, we were talking about what's your first... because we now have like a pile of the diskette drives that we brought over from Adafruit, and they're at home. And it was funny because it's like when I was a kid in high school, I had some old retro technology. Of course, at the time, like retro was like 5 years, right? And now it's like 30 years. But when I was in high school, I helped out with the IT department.
I'm shocked.
Which was like, I think I played video games, but also like I think I coiled cables, and I think I ran Ethernet a couple times. Like I was, it was just like a high school, after school type thing. And the computer lab got renovated, and for those who are about my age, you remember all your computer labs were Apple IIs for a very long time. And eventually, the Apple IIs, which did last like 20 years, surprisingly long amount of time, they eventually got replaced with PCs. And so, one day I was down in the cage in the basement of the high school, and there was these stacks of Apple IIs, and I think they're 2GSs, and like disk drives and monitors. And the IT director, I don't remember her name, unfortunately, but she's like, "Oh, I'm going to dumpster these, but if you want them, you can grab them." And I always said, like, I was kind of like this really weird, nerdy girl who like did electronics and retro stuff and computing and coding and hacking. And, you know, I was kind of the only one who helped at the... Now it's kind of cool to help out in the computer lab, but at the time it was, like, definitely, like, not that cool. But they had all this pile of stuff, and at the time I was hanging out with a bunch of hackers in the Boston area who had this hacker space at the time called The Loft. And they really liked their old computing. They had, like, a VAX station, and they had, you know, a bunch of old, like... Tandies and Cocos and what have you, and I thought they would have liked the Apple IIs because even though they were retro, they were still kind of expensive. So I called up. So this is where I don't remember if did I call or did I post a message on the BBS. But I got in touch with Joe Grand, who at the time was going by Kingpin, and I said, hey, you know, down in my high school, there's a bunch of Apple IIs. You want to come by and grab them, and we can take some to the loft and either like sell them at swap meet or turn them into like some gaming station. And so he came by, and we were digging through the hardware. I think we like kind of pulled out like the best of the computers in the pile, and then we're like, okay, we have to get a ride to the loft. And we didn't drive. Like I was obviously like 15 or 14, and I think Kingpin was also like 18 or 19 and didn't have a car. So he's like, no problem. So we called Mudge over and said, hey, can you come, you know, grab these Apple IIs because they're really heavy and take them over to the loft. And so Mudge came by, and at the time he had a really cool car. We just asked him what it was, and it was a Mustang Cobra, all black. I think it was a convertible. So, you know, I'm hanging out in front of like the high school, like holding like these like 3 Apple IIs and like a monitor and a disk drive. And I'm probably taller than me. And like the most like bitchin', like awesome looking car with all these mods, like drives up in front. And that's where like everyone was like skateboarding and like smoking cigarettes and hanging out. This is right after class. And everybody's like, what the fuck is this car that just came in? And the door opens, and I like sit down inside of it with like these Apple IIs on my lap, and like closed the door and drove off. And like I could see like everybody was like, what is going on? Why is nerdy girl Lamar getting into this like sweet car, and who's driving away with her? So it was really cool for like 2 days.
Yeah, but you know, this is the thing. There is a Ladyada right now in high school getting made fun of and getting ridiculed, and I hope there is a Mudge and a Kingpin that's out there helping out and starting that spark, because we're here because lots of nice people decided that they saw something in us, and I worry that there's not enough of that anymore. So anyways, Mudge is now the chief security officer of Twitter, and we were just hanging out with him, and it was really nice to catch up. And we were just emailing with Mudge and Joe just now because we're like, hey, like this is a fun story.
What's funny is Mudge actually is the one who told us this story, because I didn't remember it. And then we were at a party, not recently, but like a while ago. He told me the story, and I was like, oh yeah, like I remember it when he told me. But of course, to him, he's like, he definitely had, he made the joke. He's like, yeah, I'm going to high school, I'm picking up chicks and Apple IIs.
Yeah. But think about it.
He had cool hair at the time.
All these people and all these folks are connected, and there's not a lot of us. And I think we can help uplift and raise the next generation, and show them that computing can be fun, and you can have really good times, and you can meet good people, and there's a lot of good morals you can bake into this stuff too. It doesn't all have to be bad. And I think we're all beaten down, and the last couple of years have been hard. But it doesn't have to be that way. Like, we all get to do something, and Adafruit's its own little universe. But I really thought this story was important. So thanks for sharing it, Ladyada. I know you don't do a lot of personal stories.
Now we have a video edit. Yeah, this was it's a fond memory. It was very funny at the time. But yeah, there was I think there was even a computer club, and I wasn't in it, and like girls weren't in it. There was a lot of stuff when I was. In high school, I remember there was a D&D club, and like girls weren't really allowed in it. And at the time, of course, now that sounds ridiculous. So many girls and women do D&D, but at the time, it was it just kind of wasn't done. Which is good. Things have really changed.
Yeah, you were the first female engineer on Wired's cover, and now it wouldn't be unique or interesting at all that's a fact, because there's been so many since. So, we're all breaking some silicon ceilings. around here in some way.
All right, well, that's all deep
cuts.
Good
story. Okay, well, that's our Desk of Ladyada tonight, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Glad we got to do some story time and more. We're going to do a bunch of stuff. Just straight up, everybody, just because I help manage 130 plus people. We have a bunch of people testing positive. They're all fine. They've been at home, but after the holidays, it's happening. They're all okay because they have been boosted and vaxxed. Please, 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 just stay frosty, stay sharp, stay safe, because this wave is pretty much the worst it's been, at least mathematically, for the number of people, how fast that we've seen in New York City in our circles. So please be careful, everybody. I want to see all of you after this is over, because we got a lot of stuff to do. All right, that's it. All right,
more floppy hacking coming soon. Send in your cool retro stories. We'll post them on the blog.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody. Have a great week.